Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
Well, it's actually a really timely question because I'm doing that right now, basically with,
Nice.
yeah, like we're trying to, this is national team stuff. So it's mostly elite based athletes and things like that we're talking about. But I think it still applies, right? So I would go to the major competition of the year. That's, kind of the end peak competition of the season. And I would kind of plan back from there. So the first, that competition for a lot of the athletes that I'm programming for right now would be World Championships, which is in late September, I believe, this in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So I would start in late September and I'd work back, how many weeks do we have, right? And then I'd plug in the, maybe lower level but still important competitions, whether that's from a team qualification standpoint or athlete points or whatever that is. Plug those in just to kind of see, okay, these are some maybe not peaks, but these are things that we have to think about when we're planning. And that you talked about the 3-month chunks. Those are usually our macro cycles, as I would usually call them.
Yep.
So we would try to end a macro cycle on one of those smaller competitions. So
Yep.
in Canada, the next competition that's coming up is actually very soon. It's Elite Canada is in a 2 weeks or something along those lines, which a lot of our elite girls are going to be competing in. So after that competition is done, we're going to kind of restart our periodization to lead us into September and October. So from there, we kind of look at what's the next. Okay, so Canadian championships are in May. That's going to be something that we want everyone to be able to show really well at. So that from January to May, that 5-month block is probably going to be our first macro cycle. So within there, I would break that up into usually what the term we would use is mesocycles. So more like 3, 4, 5 week blocks, depending on what else is involved there. And you might see, for different athletes, some smaller competitions or maybe, whether it's mock meets at their clubs or, provincial level things that they have to do within that. So that's kind of maybe where we would bookend our mesocycles to line up with the end of that competition.
Yep.
So now, again, we're looking at the macro cycle between essentially now and May, January and May, which is around 4 or 5 months, right? Depending on where we're cutting it off, breaking it up into mesocycles. And then I'm going to start to look at, how long, like what are the stepping stones that we can take to get to our ultimate goal, which is usually, speed and power or reactive strength, like, the ability to pop and stuff like that. So depending on the athlete, and especially if I'm looking at relatively new to weight training, not necessarily, new to gymnastics or new to sports or anything like that, but relatively new to weight training, I'm going to try to take my time, and I'm not going to go right into heavy weights, or I'm not going to go right into explosive power right off the bat. I'm going to look at what the base of that is. And for me, the base of that, and I think I presented this concept at the Shift Symposium last summer.
Yep.
But it was essentially the base of those speed and power things for me are strength. Now, for me to actually want to load athletes to do maximal strength type training, I need at least 6 or 8 weeks of lead up to get them to a point where they can handle the heavy loads. So we usually have a phase or two, and by phase I mean mesocycle, if I want to keep the same terminology going.
Yep.
Where it's a little bit higher reps, lower weight, build some tissue tolerability to loading and that kind of stuff, some movement patterning. So teaching them to squat, teaching them to hip hinge, deadlift again, like maybe they haven't done it for a bit if they're older athletes, or maybe they've never done it if they're newer athletes to the gym.
Yes, good question.
So this is assuming I've myself and maybe a physio or myself an athletic therapist have communicated, every's good.
You have unlimited tools to use. You've invested kettlebells and dumbbells and barbells. Let's put that theory out there. You're not in a barn somewhere.
You mean we're not training Rocky and Ivan Drago? And
that's it. Yeah, we're gonna build them out of concrete and buckets.
No, so I mean, I with this 16-year-old, I know what I want to get to. I want to get to speed, power, strength eventually. So I'm going to start with the building blocks of speed. So the building blocks of speed for me is technique usually. So I'm going to start with some really technical, drills that are really easy to do kind of anywhere. All you need is maybe a wall and a floor. So, the two that come to mind that I use really often are if you've seen like wall drills where you're kind of hands are on a wall, 45-degree angle, heels are maybe just off the ground, and you're essentially having a 45-degree angle plank where you're trying to push the wall down, but you lift one leg up in kind of a, you can imagine that kind of sprint start position. That would be one of the things that I would start with in terms of my building blocks for speed, and holding that position for 15, 20, 30 seconds, where you're really trying to put, and again, when I'm saying 15, 20, 30 seconds, that's like my progression over the month probably, where you're trying to push the wall down in a split stance, like a first step of a sprint position. Yeah, there you go.
Scott did not ask me to pull this up, but I'm just trying to get any frame of reference from our YouTube channel. But
so it's along these lines, right? So you can start with that as your building block for speed. You can progress over the first couple of months to, quick switches where you're now you're trying to hold your pelvis steady while you're in that acceleration position. So I would be even a little bit more leaned over than in that video, but that's okay. So that's what I'm doing for speed, if that's my building block. My building block for power is usually landing, to be honest. Like when I say power, like more like plyos, if you're thinking about plyometrics as a thing that you want to do, you want to be able to do really high level plyometrics. We're going to work on landing mechanics. So we're probably going to drop off a box, 12 inches or 18-inch box, and just kind of catch ourselves in a medium kind of squat position to teach and look at how we're landing. So, is our shoulders over knees, are our knees caving, are our knees right over top of our toes, like that sort of stuff. So we're going to do some of those, and maybe some box seated box jumps where we're starting from a seated position and jumping exactly like that. Perfect.
I'm quick on the gun here.
You're
For those
fast.
Listening in audio, I'm pulling these up on YouTube as Scott is doing it. So trying to help out our listeners.
Yeah. So, and then we're going to, from that box that we're dropping off of, we might just practice jumping. So then thinking about triple extension. So teaching, ankles, knees, hip extension for a jump. So we're getting really tall every time we're jumping from a static seated position where we can't use any counter movement. We can't cheat at all. We've just got to go from that slack position at the bottom. So that's going to be my initial building block for plyos, or for power, I guess, if we go with that. And then the next piece that I want to do from a strength standpoint is I want to start to teach the big movement patterns that we've talked about a ton of times, whether that, from a lower body standpoint, that's going to be squatting patterns and deadlift or hip hinge patterns. Usually once I get to the point of loading, it's probably going to be a goblet squat, to be honest. So that's going to be my squat pattern that I'm going to use. And I'll probably use a dowel deadlift to start with, before we start loading, but then maybe
Sorry if I'm throwing you off with these exercises. If I'm not helping, just let me know.
No, it's good. It's just impressive that you're pulling them up so fast. So that's why. Deadlifting or hip hinging patterns, we're probably going to do maybe a 2 dumbbell or maybe even a single kettlebell deadlift, where they're going to learn to shift their hips back to the wall behind them, and we're going to start to learn that movement pattern as well. And those are both bilateral versions. We probably would do some split pelvis or unilateral versions, which would be probably a split squat of some sort or a reverse lunge. Exactly. And from a hip hinge pattern, it would be like a single leg Romanian deadlift or something along those lines, where we're learning to again still use a hip hinge pattern, but only on one side. Yeah, perfect. So from there, we're going to move into upper body pressing and pulling. Again, for gymnasts, I'm not a huge fan of barbells when it comes to upper bodies. I don't really like to fix their scapula in one spot, which, whether that's right or wrong, I don't really know. But I when I do upper body movements, I usually start, to be honest, with 16-year-olds who haven't maybe been in the gym before, with like tempo push-ups, and we're gonna build capacity in a pushing movement with tempo. So it's going to be maybe a 3-2-1 push-up for 6 or 8 or 10 reps, depending on their capacity. And we're going to go nice and slow on the way down, pause a little bit, and then come back up. So that's going to be body weight based for pushing. The next step for me there is usually some sort of dumbbell press, whether we're on a flat bench or maybe a slightly inclined bench. Both arms at the same time, dumbbell pressing, and again, just loading some strength there. And again, this is our initial off-season phase, so we're not into any power type stuff yet. From a pulling standpoint, upper body pull standpoint, I'm going to look at some body weight stuff as well, like maybe a TRX row or a bar row, which again in the gymnastics setting you can do with a block and uneven bars or bar. And we're just going to look at really quality of scapular movement, like what are the shoulder blades doing, what's the head of the humerus, or what's like that, the front of your shoulder doing while you're pulling and pressing. Those are two things that I see, especially with younger gymnasts, being a bit of an issue, where you get that like big bulge in the front. They can't control the kind of front aspect of their shoulder. So we're going to cue that and like build capacity in staying in a good position while still letting your scapula move around the rib cage while they're moving. And then it's usually so one more, and that's usually going to be some torso type stuff. So again, gymnastics athletes are really good, and I think I've heard you talk about this a ton. Doing crunches, bicycles, really dynamic movement, hollow body based stuff, but maybe they haven't done a ton of static torso stuff, or like loaded static torso things, or anti-rotation, anti-flexion, anti-extension type stuff. So we'll work on glute bridges, like plank variations, and usually some sort of anti-rotation press, like a Palloff, standing Palloff press. And those are some of the things that will be involved in programs for the first 12 to 16 weeks, that will progress from lighter loads. So there's an example of a single leg hip lift, or glute bridge, as I think I called it. And we'll start again lighter, higher reps, and we'll progress over those first 3 months, like we described earlier, to heavier, lower reps. And it's not necessarily that we're going to drastically change the exercises. Like maybe we'll go from a goblet squat to a front or back squat, potentially, depending on over those few months. But you can get a ton of adaptation with a progressive overload with the same exercises for that period of time, especially with someone who's relatively new to the gym.